Just again, welcome to everybody. This is our second panel focusing on perspective for the DePaul Spring English Conference. And so, we're looking at just the narrative craft of perspective and how it's just a way for both readers and writers to step into points of view that accurately and fully kind of tell the story at hand in the way that the writer has in mind. So it really, shapes the story and the narrative and how readers will experience the text. And so we thought it would be just an important kind of topic to cover. We have pieces ranging from creative nonfiction to poetry and microfiction. And so we're really excited that you all are here. And we have Professor Rebecca Johns-Trissler as our chairperson for this panel. So thank you for being here and leading us in this conversation. And yeah, I'll just hand it off to her and we can get started.
Well, this is one of my very favorite topics, right? Because sorry, I thought I was muted there for a second. The important thing about written writing is as separating from other kinds of creative writing, like dramatic writing, is that the access to the mind of someone else. And so the perspective in which you choose to tell a story, a poem, a work of fiction is one of the big creative choices that any writer has to make. So I'm really interested in hearing from our panelists today, and then we'll leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. Thank you all so much for coming. One of the things I like about a virtual conference is you can invite friends from all over. You don't have to all necessarily take off work to be in the same room together. We can take an hour to be in a panel together. So we have some really excellent writing to showcase today. I am going to go in the same order in which the readers were listed on the program. So we're going to start with two pieces by Caitlin Costello. One is a poem and one will be a creative nonfiction excerpt. So Caitlin, why don't you start with The Believer and then we'll go into the CNF piece.
Okay, thank you so much. And for the excerpt, how long did you want that to be?
Like 2 pages, 2.5, something like that.
Okay, great. So this first piece is called The Believer. That late summer afternoon, they begged to go for a walk. My nieces, the twins, red-haired and blue-eyed both. One trailed behind, bothered by a blister, while the other chattered beside me on the wide street, led by the dog who listened to the chittering birds, the cicadas' brassy whine, and each word from the mouth of the little girl. She spoke, kicking a pebble as she scuffed along, and the tree's leaves shuffled overhead, shading us from the heat. Why do parents worry so much? She wondered, her freckles folded in a crease between her brows, glancing backward at her sister's silent contemplation. There was no answer, just the quiet echo of the wind and the sun's hazy warmth. She lifted her face skyward, pointing toward a white cloud towering above us, splintered by shards of light, and said, "Look there. Wouldn't that be a perfect place for God?" Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Caitlin. So that was a kind of a flash nonfiction prose poem, which I think was a great way to start us off. And I want to come back and talk to you more about that at the end of the program. But why don't we go ahead and move on to your creative nonfiction piece?
Sure. I'm going to skip around a little bit, but I'll do a small excerpt.
It's called The Smallest Things.
The Smallest Things. I can't write this. Every time I sit down to write this, suddenly there's anything more important to do. If this story thinks it's important, let me tell you something, it's not. An important story would be there no matter what else was going on in the world. It wouldn't rest. An important story would wake you in the morning with a cup of coffee and a fresh notebook and a ballpoint pen. An important story wouldn't only come to you in the middle of the night once you had already had too much to drink and tell you its meaning, a meaning that would abandon you by morning if you didn't immediately write it down. I was going to name my narrator. She hadn't yet been named, and I thought it was time to give her a name since she hasn't really had a voice. And maybe if I named her, I could figure out what her voice should be. How could it be that she had no voice and she had no name when the narrator was supposed to be me? How could I explain to myself that I still haven't given myself a voice? This story is not a way to explain my grief over being abused. It is not a story about a sad relationship. It is definitely not a story about survival. Just because he hadn't hit her in a while didn't mean she wasn't still afraid of him. He got angry at the smallest things. A month or so ago, Jay bought Cece a bouquet of flowers from a florist by his work, the florist they had used for their wedding. He had always been the best gift giver. The bouquet was elaborate, bursting with lilies and irises so deeply purple that they were almost neon. Cece carefully cut the stems on an angle, placing them in her favorite vase with the exact amount of food and water the florist recommended, and displayed the bouquet on the dining room table. The next day, as she dusted and vacuumed and scrubbed their little apartment, Cece smiled at the flowers, relishing in their happy fragrance. She was excited when Jay came home that evening. Cece told him how hard she had worked, inspired by his lovely flowers, of course, to clean this space that they called home, and wasn't he so proud of her? He plopped his bag on the floor, and after looking around, his eyes landed on the vase. "You didn't change the water for the flowers," he said. Cece was crestfallen. It was the one thing she hadn't done. "Why do you always point out the one thing I didn't do?" she cried. "I don't always point out the one thing you didn't do," he said. "I gave you a gift that meant a lot to me because you said I never surprised you, so I surprised you with flowers, and now you're not going to take care of them." He paused. "They were expensive. If this is how it's going to be, then don't expect any flowers from me anymore." A heavy silence wedged itself between them. Cece carried the flowers to the faucet, pushing the supple green stems aside as she ran them under the water. She ripped open a new packet of flower food and poured it into the vase with a hiss. Jay didn't speak to her the rest of the night. After that, each time she passed the dining room table, she averted her eyes. She would be relieved when the flowers were dead. Things hadn't always been this way. Cece remembered a time when she and Jay were so obsessed with one another that anything they did together was special. One of her favorite things were their walks to Dunkin' Donuts. That was when they lived in a makeshift apartment in his parents' basement just a few summers ago. They had a coffee maker, but it was one of those one cup wastes of time, so it became their routine to walk to Dunkin' Donuts. One coffee and one donut each was their treat. Jay would balance his coffee and the bag of donuts in one hand so he could thread the other around Cece's waist. Cece sipped her drink as she walked, pleased at the way the piping hot liquid seared her insides. When they were almost home, Jay would pull Cece close for a kiss, smashing her body into his, and the taste of its sugary bitterness would linger on her tongue long after they had descended back into the darkness. That's a little on the nose, isn't it? Descended back into the darkness. It was, though, dark, dark down there in his parents' basement, with two windows casting small rectangles of light onto the cold, dingy carpet for a few hours each afternoon, and dark, too, in my mind for 7 years, ever since the first moment his open fist met my face and drove my front teeth through my bottom lip. No, I have to keep reminding myself, not my mind, but Cece's mind. I'm trying to establish some authorial distance here, some narrative ambiguity, so that the themes of the story become clear to myself as well as the reader. Darkness is an easy one. A character who abuses a partner definitely has some darkness lurking beneath the surface, but what about the person being abused? Is Cece indulging in her own hidden darkness by staying with Jay? I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Good job. All right. The next piece that we have is Given the Finger, Lend a Hand by Chris Carlozzo. Chris, I saw you here a second ago, so I'm guessing you're ready. Would you also pick an excerpt of a couple of pages to read for us?
Okay, let me see. Ah, yes, the wonder of having a Google Doc preloaded. I'll start from Dad. Dad. It was a 1963 Fender Super Reverb. In amp parlance, you'd call it a cherry. Cost me $2,300, showroom new. It was identical to my first serious guitar amp I bought when I was 17. But the first time I plugged this one in, it sounded muddy and weak. Took it to get serviced. $300 gone, just like that. It was cursed from day one. For now, though, it's the 80-pound foreign object, a musical tool transformed in seconds into a sledgehammer. My father is an all-Italian man with a meaty paunch and guitarist's hands, calloused with care. A few years prior, he suffered a nervous breakdown in the wake of his dad's death, landed us $90,000 in debt to chase dreams of being a music producer. In the 80s, he fancied himself a rock star with a mullet down to his ass. Nowadays, he's almost bald, half joking that he'd scalp me for my shoulder-length locks. Still in a goddamn car, so much older than when we buckled up, and Dad finally climbs in. His pinky hangs on by a couple tendons, a red slug swaddled in paper towels. Mom floors it. Burnt rubber bleeds into the air, and we breathe in iron. No words belong on our tongues. We're off to the hospital, though no one knows which. Where should we go, Mom pleads. A nurse, a pastor, a hospital chaplain. Mom knows how to take care of everyone. On weekdays, she sits with the dead and the dying. On weekends, she rises up to liven up the house with out-of-season cleaning. She is a force, but now with her foot on the gas, forced into fight or flight, she is frozen. A rare moment of clarity breaks through. Thorac, Dad heaves. Take me to Thorac, take me to Thorac, take me to Thorac, take me to Thorac. He has no idea why. Thorac Memorial Hospital it is. We've all passed by Thorac before, the dead zone where Irving Park buses sit for hours. Up on the Sheridan Red Line, it's easier to stare off at the broad beige walls rather than pick the X9s apart from the 80s. There's a window on the top floor, but I've never seen anyone inside. We come not knowing where to go and arrive not knowing where we are. Funny how it takes this much pain to make a place feel real, how the world opens up like a gash. Reality isn't much of a looker, though. The gray O of the waiting room could be mistaken for a dead rest stop along the highway. Makes sense. We're not too far from Lakeshore Drive. As Dad hides in his hands, Mom pops on a Richard Rohr tape, something about true self and false self. The former exists in an eternal divine union, while the latter is relegated to flesh, the small self, prone to loneliness. Who knows? We don't go to church anymore. Dad coddles the pinky, so close to ego death I can smell it. I've got to change, he chants. I've got to change, I've got to change, I've got to change. Minutes feel like they're made of days. The world of teal tiles and dirty electricity within Thorac is still foreign to me. A shame Dad's favorite color is seafoam green, just a few shades shy of his medical gown. Partially clothed and yet fully stripped of his dignity, he looks pale, just a few shades shy of dead skin. I visit his bedside. At least there's a view. In fact, I'm staring out the same window that I've seen 100 times from Sheridan. Something clicks, and now I'm here for him. There's no tomorrow until we all get out. The surgery happened overnight. No amputation, but none of us can hide from Dad's new pinky. His digit is left in a permanent hook, stiff as a carrot and stuffed in a metal splint. I remember it takes just as much jaw strength to bite your pinky clean off as a baby carrot, and the thought crosses my mind. Which would hurt more, my teeth or the amp? Dad. Music has been my lifeline for a lifetime, but I can't recall any songs from that day, just noises, sounds, monitors beeping, the rush of air out of ceiling vents. TVs in other rooms, indistinct blah, 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 followed by canned laughter. The rush of blood in my ears, a heartbeat thump. Shoes scuffling across mopped linoleum. Disembodied sounds, that's it. If there was any melody, even if I could conjure a tune in my head, it was warped and wrapped in a shroud of post-surgery anesthesia. Noises, sounds, all without rhythm. Random and droning machine tones. Nothing I'd call music. He seems half there, offering no more than a side glance to me. I know he's naked under the gown. My hair stands on end when I think of the breeze he's sifting through the room. The bare contours of his body are like lost sheets under more lumped sheets, his dimensions folding inward. This is the same man who laughs with his whole stomach, who cooks chicken cutlets with 2 eggs and a ditty on his lips like his deceased mother, who cries heaving and screaming into his gut like a Van Halen solo, who plays guitar behind his back and through his teeth. If he could do all of those things before, can he do them now? Is he going to be my dad when he leaves? Or will he shrink back into the cocoon of clinical depression he had just begun to emerge from? The teal-clad nurse strolls in with his dinner: coffee, corn, diced carrots, and meatloaf. Maybe this is a rest stop, the sleazy kind I hear all about in Dad's road tour stories. I want to crack a joke, but we're all dead tired. I don't remember or how or when we leave, just the quiet we leave behind. I look at him once, but even that's too much. Eyes in your feet, eyes in your feet, eyes in your feet. I think that's a good place to stop.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's so weird to say how much you enjoy something that's about violence and injury, but the playfulness of the language really stood out to me in this one. Thank you so much. We'll come back and ask Chris some more questions about this in a minute, but our next reader is Danielle Ratliff Moore, and her piece is called Are You Listening? Nonfiction editorial.
Are you listening? Listening is an art that many think they have mastered, but few actually have. My mom has always been able to listen and listen well. I try to emulate her, and people tell me I'm a good listener. I have crafted and maintained many friendships based solely on my listening abilities. Everyone listens to some degree, but are you listening enough? A great way to make a boss like you, to seduce that someone special, or to simply give someone respect is by listening. From one listener to another, here are a few tips for improved listening skills. Be mindful. The first step is knowing who you are listening to. This may sound simple, but it can be challenging. Imagine you're on a crowded form of public transportation and all you can hear is the incessant buzz of background noise. You actually aren't listening to who you thought you were. Instead of your friend, you're listening to Ryan distractedly break up with his girlfriend over the phone, or Cam complain to their mother about an annoying coworker. As Brian H. McGill, author and activist, said, one of the most sincere forms of respect is actually listening to what another has to say. So keep your head in the game. Minimize distractions. One key to great listening is knowing when to make eye contact with the speaker. Appropriate eye contact lets the speaker know you're really listening and not getting distracted by things around you, like your phone, your food, or the person sitting across from you on the train. Don't look at the speaker so much that they get uncomfortable. If they start twitching or looking out of the corner of their eye, you're probably overdoing it. Make eye contact occasionally, every couple of minutes, or whenever the speaker thinks they have said something super funny or spectacular. Be approachable. Part of listening comes with learning how to unknowingly hold your face in an inviting way, even if you're sitting alone on a bus seat with no intentions of listening to anyone. It has become a trend in my life where I'm sitting alone somewhere and someone who I might know, but not always, sits next to me and within minutes is 3 breaths into a lifelong narrative about how their parents were toxic and that's the reason they just got out of an appointment with their therapist. It might seem strange, but as Roy T. Bennett, author of The Light in the Heart, puts it, sometimes all a person wants is an empathetic ear. All he or she needs is to talk it out. Just offering a listening ear and an understanding heart for his or her suffering can be a big comfort. I don't know if it's how I hold my lips when I am reading a book, or if it's the way I'm looking around that makes me appear approachable and ready to listen. Try out a few different sitting positions and interchanging facial expressions to see which ones appear most inviting for the speaker. Don't speak. Speak as little as possible when you're the one listening. If you get away with shaking your head yes or no, that's even better. People hate to be interrupted, talked over, and especially hate it when those that are supposed to be listening share a story of equal or greater interest on the same or similar topic. Don't go there. Knowing when to say something like, or yeah in moments of silence encourages the speaker to complete their thought and convinces them that you're listening. Beware of saying too much because the speaker might feel that you're either hijacking their story or bored. Stephen R. Convey, author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Powerful Lessons in Personal Change, stated, "Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply." You will have to listen to a lot of mediocre stories to learn the art of understanding and minimal vocal interjection. However, if you listen well enough, the speaker might pay attention to you when you have something to say. Give advice. Giving advice can be tricky and it is not always welcome, but people will often come to listeners for advice, so be prepared. Because you are a listener, that makes you a prime candidate for advice giving. You have likely listened to all your friends as they have talked through their most difficult times, as well as eavesdropped on lots of other heartfelt and controversial conversations. Try to cater your advice to the individual. Easiest if you know the speaker. A simple way to advise is to repeat, preferably in other words, what the speaker has said earlier. Keep in mind people love when you agree with them, so don't put too much effort into arguing against the speaker's opinion, unless it's someone you really care about. If you haven't made it clear what opinion they have on the subject, ask them. The speaker probably has an answer already prepared and are just waiting for you to ask, so you can then agree with them. If all else fails, lie. Honestly, of course. Be fulfilled. Don't think too much about it, but remember, not everything is about you and your feelings. One of the best things about being a listener is knowing how important your listening can be for the speaker's new relationship, their peace of mind, or their healing process. The art of listening is ultimately the art of influencing people, winning friends, and being kind.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for sharing that piece with us. The second person imperative is really interesting. We'll come back to that in a second. But our next speaker is Kaylee Koch with a group poem called Disassembly, Pantome. And she has a video to share with us. So I will turn it over to her. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I might want to say just a few words before it's shared, if I might. So it is a collaborative Pantome poem that's in response to the BLM movements. And it's inspired by Professor Chris Green's poem, American Gun. And I would once again like to thank all of the contributing writers. I think a few of them are here, so thank you so much.
If we peel back our skin, it is red and bleeds the same. Though I don't look like you and you don't look like me, I know that internally we are flesh and bone, yet externally we are pigment and judgment.
Though you don't look like me and I don't look like you, I know that with every protest and petition, the future becomes clear. Externally, we're pigment and judgment, guided by our insecurities and fears.
With every protest and petition, the future becomes clear, the tally of systemic endings, this feast of famine, guided by our insecurities and fears into the childhood of a nation, its ancient breakings.
Tally of systemic endings, this feast of famine, never to be satisfied until justice is secured for the disenfranchised. Into the childhood of a nation, its ancient breaking. A history that we haven't truly acknowledged.
Never to be satisfied until justice is secured for the disenfranchised, dismantling a system of oppression and a history that we haven't truly acknowledged. Building racism was intentional, and so must be its disassembly.
Dismantling a system of oppression and lifting weights off backs carrying the burdens of time gone and coming. Building racism was intentional, and so must be its disassembly, with tools that break the chains without harming the person shackled.
Lifting weights off backs carrying the burdens of time gone and coming. Embracing an unrelenting necessity, no momentary movement. With tools that break the chains without harming the person shackled. Solidarity in every action, intent in every word.
Embracing an unrelenting necessity, no momentary movement, becoming both the next victim and advocate, self-sacrificing, solidarity in every action, intent, and every word, detailing every movement as their open source try not to become infected.
Becoming both the next victim and advocate, self-sacrificing, risking infection just to get the point across that Black people have been silenced for too long, detailing every moment as our open source try not to become infected, letting the fires that burn bright in the street burn as a beacon, signaling this country's need for change.
Risking infection just to get the point across that Black people have been silenced for too long. Debate of all lives can't matter until Black lives can echoes into the hearts and minds of oppressors. Letting the fires that burn bright in the street burn as a beacon, signaling this country's need for change. In exchange, superficial solidarity. Wakanda forever as the blueprint for ignorance.
Debate of all lives can't matter until Black lives can echoes in the hearts and minds of our oppressors. Black folks wait desperately to see the light bulb turn on in exchange for their superficial solidarity. Wakanda forever as the blueprint for ignorance. Your false solidarity masks our cries for equity.
Black folks wait desperately to see the light bulb turn on, to see bright sparks in the sky, an explosion of true emancipation. False solidarity masks cries for equity, and sirens suffocate birdsong, that shrill chirping, a constant reminder that something's amiss, that the world is too sore to sing.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was really wonderful. And I'm dying to come back to this, Kaylee, and talk to you more about it. So, and how it came together. So let's, we'll come back to that, and I think that'll be pretty exciting. So our next speaker is Connor Lindsay with a microfiction called Mary Hoyne Was a Friend of Mine. Connor, take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, this is Mary Hoyne Was a Friend of Mine. Mary Hoyne was a friend of mine, but just for the afternoon. She sipped white wine from a stemless glass at the bar of a bird-themed burger chain in the middle of a strip mall. The sales call brought her to my neck of the woods, but she got there way too soon. I thought about seeing a movie, she said, indicating the theater through the window behind her, but I just don't have the time. She glanced at her watch, then the last sip of my pint, then Kyle's empty chocolate shake. You guys ready for another? We were, and then for 2 or 3 more. I've only been working there a few weeks, she said as she handed us her business pens. But I've always been in sales. I hate the tech I have to use, though. It makes it so impersonal. She pulled her laptop out to practice her pitch on us, but the program didn't work. So she texted her boss, who called and scolded her to go home. I called the number on her pen once, just a couple months later. I needed new windows after Amy split. Had to fix the house to sell. Mary didn't work there anymore. That's it.
Thank you so much, Connor. I don't know if everybody can tell, but that your title is part of the piece, like a poem. So I want to come back to that in a second. Thank you so much. All right, so that brings us to Emma Ludman, who's going to read us a poem called Wednesday Therapy.
Okay, so this is Wednesday Therapy. Sitting on the window ledge between the potted plant and dormant air conditioning unit, I watch the girl on the couch. Melting into a puddle between cracked leather, she clutches a tissue, and with sweaty palms and ragged nails, she folds it into little triangles, lining up the edges over and over again as nervous words tumble off her lips and pool together in neat lines on the lap of the woman across from her. I avert my gaze and focus instead onto cars below collecting raindrops on tin roofs. It always seems to be raining when she drags me here. I savor the melancholy while she savors a lemon drop from a glass bowl on the woman's desk. I hate the girl on the couch. I hate her trembling hands and her sorrow. I hate how her voice cracks with brutal honesty, spilling our secrets to the woman in search of judgment and answers. I hate when she cries most of all. From time to time, I try her on, but her fragility is foreign and suffocating, a skin I refuse to own. When she brings me here to this tiny office with the stained glass lobby and old-fashioned elevators, I leave her behind at the door and take my place on the sill, passing time counting minutes and cars and raindrops, waiting for the hour to be up so we can walk hand in hand back towards the station, our pain bundled up and tucked away in the pit of her stomach to be ignored until next week.
Thank you so much, Emma. So many interesting points of view in all these pieces. Thank you so much. I want to open it up to questions. I know a lot of people here are speakers, but I think there's also some family members of speakers. Do we want to entertain any questions? You can type them in the chat or just unmute yourself and blurt them out. Emma, go ahead, Avery, did you have something?
Sorry, yeah, no, I was going to ask Kaylee a question about the collaborative piece.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I love this. It was just awesome. And I think Anna put the link in the chat too, in case anybody wants to go back to it. But I want to know how this was created, how you gathered all of these incredible writers, how it was written. I'm just very curious about this piece.
Yeah, sure. So originally I was going to write a poem in response just by myself, but then I was like, this is not as powerful as it needs to be. And I have one of my really good friends, she's African American. We have this just incredible, strong friendship, and I really wanted to feature that in the poem itself. So I asked her and her sister, and then I reached out to a bunch of friends who are like across the United States, and they all just came together and agreed to help me write this poem. And it's actually Pantome. So like we would take the first line and the third line, and then, or the second and the fourth line, and they would be replaced in the next stanza. So everyone kind of relies on each other to write the poem, which kind of just weaves the voices together. And we did that on a Google Doc. I just started out with the first stanza, then the next writer, we had like a list of people, would go on and take my second and fourth lines and put that, and it just went on. I think there were about 9 to 11 writers. So
Google Doc, creating a new chance for this medium to kind of flourish, I guess, right? So did you, you said you were inspired by Chris Green's Pantome, American Gun, that was a Big Shoulders book. Were you in his course, or how did you become familiar with American Gun?
Yeah, so spring quarter last year, I was in his poetry class, and we actually analyzed that Pantome poem, American Gun. And then that kind of sprouted the idea in my mind that that's probably what I should do for this as a part of the piece.
That's pretty cool, Kaylee. Are you planning on doing anything with it?
It's gotten a lot of coverage this past year, so this is like just one step further.
Okay, awesome, good. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. So in the chat, Professor Anton asked, some of you are writing poems, some prose poems. How does writing and reading poetry deepen your prose or make it more intense? Does anybody want to take that one? Has anybody been reading much poetry? Chris, Caitlin, you're working in kind of a prose poem form. Yeah, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think for me, it's forced me to make every word count. I really want to take that potency from poetry and inject it into all of my work, which can be excruciating when you're writing a short story and you can't stop focusing on one sentence or one phrase. But I think in the end, it does saturate your piece with meaning, because you can fill it with so many lovely images and play around with your prose.
Just thinking again about this question of perspective, Caitlin, you're working in all three forms. You're working in poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction. How do you see those kind of in conversation in prose poems or flash nonfiction, or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, I think that they all, for me, end up becoming building blocks toward the larger work. So, thinking in poetry not only helps me develop, sentence structure, but then it will develop sections of my pieces. So I actually, often don't write all the way through. It's hard for me to kind of write linearly beginning to end. So instead I will think almost like in vignettes.
Sure.
And my writing has always been inspired by my personal experience. So to have that thin veil to cross over between nonfiction and fiction is a nice thing to be able to do.
Okay, thank you. Chris, what about you? Do you read much poetry?
I find that I'm terrible with like picking up on like a certain poem, but when I read it aloud, I notice there's a lyrical flow there that I can pick up on, even if I'm not picking up on a subject matter or poetic techniques. If I can get the way that I'm writing to sound like something I've read, then I feel like that makes it stronger. Ultimately, like coming out of like a performance arts background, you get the experience of like all your writing is multimodal in that it's a piece of text that someone is going to read and that someone can read aloud. So there's always going to be like an auditory factor to that. And I try to a certain extent, if it's not actually a lyric, I'll try to make it sound more lyrical.
Okay. And that certainly comes across in the writing. There was a very nice lyricism in that essay that you read for us. Connor, what about you? You were writing a kind of a micro prose. You are interested in longer forms too. What made you write this short piece?
Well, I think for one, I took the micro prose class, so there's that.
There you go.
But I think with the micro pieces, like it's just so great for you can explore these things that you wouldn't explore in a longer form. You wouldn't necessarily think this has legs for like, this doesn't have 10 pages of legs, So I think, but kind of the question of poetry, it's interesting because I've always been very intimidated by poetry. I'm not really, I don't go out of my way to read it. But I do think micro prose has kind of been like a bit of a gateway drug almost. Like it's a little easier to parse it after kind of working in that format.
Okay. Cool. All right. Thank you. There's more questions in the chat. Lou Carlozo addressed this to Chris. He wants to know, did you feel your view of me or your relationship with me change after you wrote the story? Chris, I'm guessing this is your dad.
Yes, this is my dad. Hello, Dad. This is actually, I think, a conversation we've had, but in writing the story, realized just how numb to this process I was. Like, this was a memory I mentioned once in conversation, like, hey, remember that happened? And suddenly it became an investigation or like a scouring for memories. On the one side, I was trying to open up a memory, that like in some ways opening up an old wound. For my dad, that ended up being like a healing process. Kind of going forward, the end of the story is like this very like very stark, like the same kinds of images are sort of resolved. My relationship with my father is like this. I think of the story as a kind of pivot point. It's not it's something that in the very least, like the process of it was conversational. Those like bits of dad monologue were actually an offhanded suggestion that my dad made. And suddenly I had an obligation to open up his voice, which opened up my voice in turn. So ultimately, I think of this as my dad kind of like giving me an opportunity to develop personally as a writer, but more so to say like, how do I say this? Like, you ever heard like someone say like, "What's mine is yours"? I'm usually the kind of person where it's like, oh, I guess what I will say is this is just kind of like, it has been a pivot point, and it has helped me to talk more deeply about like what family traumas we've all kind of tried to shove under the rug, and ultimately I think that's made our relationship stronger.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. I think that's really interesting, the idea that giving your dad voice in the essay opened it up for you as well. And I wonder if that's partly true also with Kaylee, with the Pantome, that allowing other people to respond and play with the pattern. It's kind of a wonderful thing about a Pantome is that it is a response and a build. Has anybody else felt like that giving another character, another person a chance to speak in their piece opened it up for them? Emma, what about you? You are actually responding to yourself in a different perspective.
Yeah, I think it's always very interesting as a writer just to examine moments where you're maybe not so aware of yourself in a specific situation. So for my piece, I really focused on like a very repetitive experience of going to this therapist's office. And I have never really like examined how I was in that moment. So I think to break it down from when I'm there, I'm one person. When I leave, I'm another, just to step into this other side of myself as like the speaker of this poem was very interesting, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, seeing yourself from the outside, putting your own experience under the microscope kind of opened it up for you. Okay. Anybody else? Well, Emma, while we're still with you, Professor Anton asked, how did you come up with the wonderful line, always seems to be raining?
I think going back to that idea of repetition, just taking something this is like a mundane experience for me and trying, although like in that moment it truly was raining, it speaks to like the overall mood of the piece. Yeah, so I would just say I was trying to find something that really fit the physical circumstances as well as like the emotional circumstance of the experience I was writing about.
Okay, thank you very much. And Avery asked a question for everyone. How did your unique perspective as a person or a writer impact your creation of your piece? Anybody want to tackle that one? Danielle, what about you? Your piece is a kind of a service journalism, kind of a how-to thing. And having written a lot of these myself, I recognized right away that second person imperative, you do this, you do that, of giving advice. What made you decide to write the piece that way?
Well, just in life, I'm a pretty shy person, so I tend to not talk that much in conversations. And people are like, oh my gosh, you're such a good listener. And I think part of it is because just me as a person, I don't speak that much. And when people talk to people that don't speak that much, they tend to talk more. So I kind of wanted to do a how-to piece on listening because everyone's like, oh my gosh, how are you such a good listener? And I had started with just keeping my voice kind of more out of it and thinking of just a straight, like, these are the things that I do to be a good listener. And then I'm like, you know what? It's more interesting to make it kind of humorous and to think of all the times that I have listened to people and it's just been random people that have sat next to me or just saw me reading and come over and talk to me. So yeah, I think I'm able to say more through my writing than I am usually just having a conversation with somebody.
You feel it gives more power to your voice and you feel more free to speak? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Danielle. Other questions for our speakers today? Okay. Anybody? Just so many wonderful pieces today. Such a nice mix of fiction, poetry, nonfiction. Caitlin, I just want to come back to yours for a second and ask how you decided to do a mix of fiction and nonfiction in your piece. So you have the sections that you read that were C, C, and J, in which you've kind of created characters, but then interspersed with that is the first person nonfiction part in which you're interrogating what you're doing. And I really thought that first person interrogation really made the piece. Can you talk a little bit about how you landed on that format for that essay?
Yeah, of course. I was actually reading in a narrative strategies course with Professor Dan Stoller this novel called The Gringa. And in it, it has this form which I've adopted where the writer is writing a historical fiction, and then it's interspersed with sections of him writing about writing. So I kind of stole the form from there, but something else that I noticed about those sections where he's writing about writing is the kind of, like tortured aspect of how am I getting this done? And based on, the experience I went through having, survived an abusive relationship, I'm often interrogating myself about these questions. So similar to what Emma was saying, I was trying to find a way to look at myself from an outside point. And it made it easier to then turn it into a third person story, but the third person story isn't enough. I had to involve the thought process of writing that. So that was the way I decided to do that. And I thought, like your mind is often fractured in situations like this. So it was nice to be able to express all aspects of that.
Okay, cool. And so any other questions? I have kind of a general one I'd like to end on, unless somebody else wants to jump in. And just talking about your own favorite story, poem, creative nonfiction, flash piece that plays with point of view. Is there any one that stands out to you? Yeah, Chris?
I know personally, while it's I'm a really, really diehard fan of Nick Flynn, both his 2004 memoir, Another Bullshit Night in Suck City, and also his collection of poems, Some Ether. While notably my dynamic with my own dad is very different from the one Flynn's talking about, it definitely does help me to get the idea of you can have the writer's perspective. They're a little bit moody and they're trying to distance themselves from the subject. But no matter how hard they try, they're still related to this person. That is deep. Right. That is like deeply humbling. Yeah, I feel like sometimes like I'm hunting for a subject with something, and this is like, wait a minute, I'm trying to talk to my dad here. There's no way I can get around of not being my parents' child. So it is just yeah.
I think no matter how old you get, Chris, that is going to be the case. Well, thank you very much. That sounds pretty cool. Anybody else have one they want to share? People who've taken my courses know that I love Tobias Wolff's Bullet in the Brain and the way the perspective switches halfway through the story away from the close third person to a more omniscient perspective as the narrator's dying. But yeah, point of view is such an interesting subject, so I'm always curious what other people say. Anybody else have one they'd like to share?
Probably any Toni Morrison book. It's probably at the top of my list.
Oh my God, yes, she is just the best. She could do that omniscient voice and just come in and make the tiniest moments feel like the end of the world, just absolutely earth-shattering. Yeah, I could read her forever. Anybody else? No. Okay, well, on that note, thank you all so much for coming today. It was a great pleasure and a privilege to hear all of your wonderful work, and I'm so pleased. I hope you can make the next session. And just a little plug, don't forget tonight at 6, we're going to be having an alum reading with Jana Slor and Jessica Chiarella about the novels they have coming out. Jana's is already out and Jessica's is coming out in July, and she's already got 2 starred pre-pub reviews for it. So we're pretty excited about that. So hope to see you there. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Bye.
Take care, everyone.